Hey, it's Jules on Radio Now 100.9, and I am back with Emily Metheny, who is our host of Indy Connection. You can hear it here on Radio Now every Sunday morning at 6 a.m. Today is actually World Suicide Prevention Day, September, National Suicide Prevention Month, so we're taking a moment today to really stop the music, have a serious discussion on mental health and suicide prevention. We're being joined today by Julie Hayden, who is the Chapter Administrator at NAMI, which is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. Julie, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Yes. Can you please explain to me a little bit more about NAMI and its local chapter?
Sure. So I am the chapter administrator for the Greater Indianapolis Chapter, and we are dedicated to improving the lives of persons and families that are affected by mental illness through education, free education, support, and advocacy throughout the greater Indianapolis area.
That's amazing. I know something that NAMI talks about is making a crisis plan. Can you go into some details about that? How do we make a crisis plan?
Sure. So on the NAMI national website or on our website, there is a guide that is very, very helpful called Navigating a Mental Health Crisis. And even if you just Googled that, Navigating a Mental Health Crisis and NAMI, it'll pop up. And it's a really great guide that guides you through what a crisis is, what signs to look for. But the amazing part is at the end, there's actual worksheets that you fill out for your family for anything that you, like a treatment record of any sort of treatments in the past, whether mental health professionals are, or case managers, therapists, whatnot. And then there's spaces to write down your medical history, as well as your medical information, medication record. And then there's a crisis plan in place that guides you through different questions that you may have or what it would look like and whatever plan that you have in place. So the really amazing thing about using a guide like this is because when there is a mental health crisis in a family, you don't want to be trying to also figure out what you are supposed to do. You have a plan in place, then you don't have to worry about all of those ins and outs. You can follow the plan and work on helping your loved one.
Yes, always way better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. So basically what you're saying is every single person needs a crisis plan, no matter if you're dealing with something mentally or not, right?
Correct. I mean, a lot of it is geared towards mental health for people that may be diagnosed or undiagnosed, but it always helps to have a plan in place so that you aren't caught off guard in case something happens.
And with a mental health crisis, because we are in a pandemic and we have seen more and more people having anxiety and depression related to it, can you kind of explain how a mental health crisis can come about?
Sure. And I think it's important to understand exactly what a mental health crisis really entails. So a mental health crisis is really any type of situation where a person's behavior puts them at risk for hurting themselves or others, and or prevents them from being able to care for themselves or function effectively. So I think a lot of times people think, well, my loved one is not in a crisis because they don't want to hurt themselves or they're not trying to hurt someone else. But a lot of times a person is in a crisis if they can't care for their own self due to a mental health condition, or if they can't function effectively, if they can't hold down a job and they can't go to a job, if all of those things are keeping them from being able to function, that is a crisis situation. So I think it's important first to recognize that. But, you know, a lot of things trigger or they can contribute or lead to a crisis. It could be something like a change in a relationship, conflicts with loved ones, trauma or exposure to violence, which is very important to remember at this time specifically. All the work and school stressors that are happening. Without COVID, work and school can be stressful, but now during COVID, obviously, work and school has become increasingly more stressful just because it's so different for everyone. But I think a lot of other things such as experiencing community violence and trauma, natural disasters, all of those things can contribute to a person being in a mental health crisis.
And just to kind of piggyback on the whole COVID topic, there's a lot of people that are not familiar with dealing with anxiety or depression or what have you about their mental health, and they're experiencing it for the first time, but they might not know it. Like, how would you tell someone, like, hey, you might need to, have a therapy session or talk to someone about what you're going through?
Sure. And I think if you're just talking to somebody about, the best thing that you can do is be an active listener, meaning sit with somebody and just get them to talk about their feelings. And a lot of what you would be doing as an active listener is getting that other person to recognize that they may have anxiety or depression. They may not say those words, but if they were saying, I'm overwhelmed and I can't really handle a lot of what's going on, sometimes you might not need to use that word, anxiety or depression. You can just guide your friend or your loved one in saying, I can see that you just need some help right now. What can I do to help you? Is there anybody I can call for you? Maybe have you thought about talking to a professional? And I think it's important to listen and have the person that's experiencing the situation to really ask for what they need rather than trying to force something that they're not ready for.
And on the same topic of COVID, and we're living in a world where we're doing things differently, are there teletherapy sessions that we can easily seek out?
Sure, and I think that there is that available, as well as there are a lot of resources that still are the same as they were before. And I think people need to know that just because COVID is happening, that doesn't mean that there aren't resources. And so in Indiana specifically, the Division of Mental Health and Addiction, or DMHA, has created this resource hub called BeWellIndiana.com, where you can go to that website and be connected to Indiana resources. And also 211, dialing 211 for specific Indiana resources is also very helpful. So they can guide you through finding what exactly you need, what location you're at, what kind of insurance or non-insurance that you have. There are resources. There are people ready and willing to find you something.
And I really liked your comment about the insurance. I feel like even with our physical health, sometimes, thinking about the cost and insurance not covering it does prevent us from getting that help. But you're saying if we dial 211, we can be connected with those resources.
Yeah. And they also have Spanish-speaking resources as well. So if you aren't comfortable fully with speaking English or listening on the phone in English, they also have resources in Spanish.
Excellent. And the crisis worksheet that will also be on our website at radionowindy.com. You also sent us a Spanish version, right?
Yes, there is also a Spanish version as well.
Excellent. And with the pandemic and COVID-19, like as a society, we're talking more and more about mental health. Where do you think this is going to go after this? Is it going to continue in the conversation and kind of start getting rid of that stigma around saying mental illness?
Well, and I think that's a great point, and I think that a lot of people are talking about it more, mainly because we are all experiencing something for the first time, every single one of us. And so we are, as a group collectively, we feel more okay to talk about our feelings because we know everybody that we talk to is also having feelings. So the more and more that our society is normalizing having conversations openly about our feelings, the more that it's going to allow people to feel comfortable talking about mental health and their mental health conditions. And so I think this is just a turning point where people are now going to be more able to fully share about how they're feeling mentally. So, it's a silver lining, I guess. I hate to say that, but it is.
And how can people start these conversations? What if they just don't know what words to start using to describe how they feel?
To describe how they feel, that's interesting. And I think, anything that parents, I think, could do this a little bit better because, children don't know how to describe their feelings. A lot of times it comes from, what a person will write about or draw about or that type of thing. So I think that if somebody doesn't know how to use words, but they're feeling something, maybe you can look towards their, creative endeavors and see if that is a good medium for them to express themselves. Yeah, but a lot of people just still, I mean, there's still a stigma towards it, right? So
Yeah.
not a lot of people are still going to be open to discussing their feelings. And as anybody, you know, if you're talking to somebody that's open, you will feel more comfortable being open. So if you want somebody to open up to you, you need to open up to them first.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people are really afraid to open up to their loved ones, and they find that it's easier to talk to a stranger.
Absolutely. And in that vein, there's a lot of helplines, like NAMI has a helpline, there's a suicide prevention hotline. Those are strangers that you can talk to that can give you exact advice about your specific situation and how to tell your family.
And that National Suicide Prevention Hotline number is 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 1-800-273-8255.
I don't think people realize you can use a crisis line like that they can help you get advice on how to talk to your loved ones about what you're going through.
I never really thought about using a line to do that.
Yeah, I didn't either. That's really good.
Yeah, and you know, the suicide prevention hotline is not just for people that are feeling like they want to die by suicide or having those thoughts. It's also for family members. So if you have a loved one you think may possibly be thinking about suicide and you have no idea how to talk to them about it, call the prevention hotline and tell them what's going on, and they will guide you through how to say that.
That's some really good info. You know, I would never have thought to use the suicide prevention hotline as a resource like that.
Absolutely.
And Julie, do you have the NAMI crisis line available, the number?
Sure. The NAMI, that's a national NAMI helpline, and that is 800-950-NAMI, or the numbers would be 6264.
And then the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-TALK.
Correct, or 8255.
I know that we just named a few, but are there any other resources that we need to know about to get our family and friends the help that they need?
Outside of the ones we mentioned, I think it's also very important that if you have a loved one that is experiencing something, to educate yourself on what that is. So, you know, your loved one may not be diagnosed with something specific, but you know there is something going on. And you can go to NAMI.org and look at different information and educational tools about specific symptoms and maybe even possible diagnoses to educate yourself. If your family member had a certain type of cancer, you would want to educate yourself on that.
Yes.
Same thing it is with a mental health condition. You want to educate yourself so that you know how to understand them better and to help them better, or just know how to listen. The more that we think about mental health conditions as the same as a physical health condition, the better everyone will be.
I totally agree. And I feel like that we live in this society where we are told to suck it up and just power through it, or you don't know what having it tough is and all of these things. But in reality, we don't know what the next person is going through and dealing with on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And that's so damaging to society as a whole. It just really is. You would never say anything like that to somebody that has a physical diagnosis.
Yep, just because we don't physically see it, and just because someone might have a smile on their face every time we see them, doesn't mean that they're not going through it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what are some of the signs to look for if someone has never dealt with a mental health crisis before? What can I be looking for in my friends and family?
Sure. So warning signs specifically to a mental health crisis would be things like inability to perform daily tasks. So daily tasks meaning, you know, just feeding yourself, changing your clothes, bathing, brushing your teeth, that type of thing. Somebody may have rapid mood swings, like increased energy levels, but then not being able to, do anything or be really withdrawn. So, you know, rapid mood swings from one or the other. Another thing would be, so it would be like agitation. And I'm not just talking about just being frustrated. I'm talking about like really violent, out of control behavior, dramatic changes in your personality or your behaviors. Increased drug use and alcohol use is very common as well, because a lot of people use those things to mask the mental health symptoms that they are experiencing. if people say things like, life isn't worth living, this doesn't matter anymore, you'll be better off without me, that's a big warning sign. That's somebody really not knowing how to verbalize that they need help. A lot of times, people will say things like that, or they will completely withdraw from your family and friends. And, sometimes family, especially family or friends, will say, well, I haven't heard from so-and-so in a while. They must be mad at me. Or I haven't heard from them. What did I do to make them mad? Maybe I should be mad about something. And instead of looking at it like, I wonder why that person hasn't called me, I'm going to check in on them. Just having a little bit of shift in perspective of maybe they're not calling because they're going through something. Take it away from yourself and put it, the perspective on them. Failed romantic relationships. I mean, sometimes people will think, oh, that's not a big of a deal. But for some people, that is a really, really, really hard thing to go through. So just because it's not hard for you necessarily as a crisis to have a failed relationship, it could be completely traumatizing for somebody. If somebody feels hopeless, helpless, that's a big warning sign. But also, any type of suicide that is surrounding the person. If the person has a loved one that has committed suicide, that has a friend that is, died by suicide, those things, or if the person has thought about dying by suicide in the past, those things are also warning signs. So, if there is a family history of that should always be considered.
And I just want to circle back to some of these warning signs. Let's just say somebody's really feeling in a funk, not really feeling themselves, feeling really down, depressed. How many days? Is it maybe like a week, 2 weeks? How many days consecutively do you have to sort of feel bad to realize something's wrong and I might need to ask for help?
That's hard. That's a tricky question because some people might not even exhibit any sort of outward symptoms until, they're really feeling completely done. But in general, anything, if somebody can't take care of themselves or they're feeling depressed for more than 2 weeks, I think that's a big warning sign. But I don't want to say that as a definite, like, right. They've only been in bed for 8 days. Maybe that's not so serious.
Yeah.
It's honestly dependent on the situation. We should all always be looking out for each other. Any sort of person, could a complete drastic change in their personality may affect them completely different than others. So right. I don't want to give a real specific guideline, but everybody should be looking out for each other, especially now.
Julie, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I think that, some of the signs that I talked about with the mental health crisis haven't really necessarily picked up on other signs that would be specifically geared towards suicide, because you have to understand that a mental health crisis may not be suicide. Mental health crisis may be, a mental health condition rather than somebody thinking about suicide. So there's a few things that you should look for in your loved ones about specifically warning signs for suicide, such as giving away your personal possessions or talking as if they're going to say goodbye or going away forever. That's a big deal. Making a will, trying to obtain a weapon, those are big. Maybe trying to obtain a lot of medications. So those are other things that really just pertain to warning signs of suicide.
And by asking someone if they're considering suicide, we've heard before that it's not putting the idea in their head. If they've had the thought before, does that make sense?
Correct, yeah. Everybody should feel comfortable by saying, are you thinking about suicide? Because in no way is that putting the thought in their head. Somebody were really thinking about suicide and somebody came to them and asked that question, they're going to be relieved that somebody was noticing it. And they're already thinking it. And even if they weren't thinking it, if they asked that kind of question, that's not going to make them think, oh, well, I think I'm going to go die by suicide now. That's not how that works. And it's not at all something that people should be shy about talking about. And again, if you're not confused about how to talk about that, you can call a National Suicide Prevention Hotline as a family or friend and ask, how do I ask my loved one if they're thinking about suicide? Give me, the words to say, and they will help with that.
And can you give us that information again on how we can connect with NAMI?
What we do at NAMI is we are offering a lot of virtual education as well as support groups for family members as well as people with a mental health condition. So be sure to go to our website, namiindy.org, to look to see what virtual offerings that we have at this time. Or you can contact us, info@nami.org, and we can go over what you are experiencing or what your family is experiencing, and we can fit you into the correct program. And everything we do is free, so you don't even have to worry about that. We are really just here to help and educate and support everyone that's going through this tough time.
Again, that was Julie Hayden. She is the chapter administrator at NAMI, which is the National Alliance of Mental Illness. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today and inform us. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me on.
You are so very welcome. And all the resources that we talked about with Julie will be on our website at radionowindy.com. Click on the News and Features tab. Right on the homepage, you'll see a drop-down menu with the mental health resources underneath that tab. So just click on that. You'll find out all about NAMI. Again, you can find out their website at namiindy.org. You can call the NAMI helpline at 1-800-950-6264. Again, that number is 1-800-950-6264. You can also email info@nami.org, and another great resource that she mentioned was called 211 for specific Indiana resources. And we're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back to talk about suicide prevention for World Suicide Prevention Day, continuing the conversation with David Berman, who is Vice President of Mental Health America of Indiana, as well as the Executive Director of the Indiana Suicide Prevention Network. It's Jules alongside Emily Metheny on Radio Now 100.9.